She was a virgin, forced into a marriage with a cold millionaire. Now he's begging for one night. Elena Marquez never imagined that the most defining moment of her life would unfold in absolute silence. Not in the applause of her future bar admission, nor amidst the restless clamor of a courtroom where justice found its voice, but in a still room where her grandfather lay motionless beneath crisp white sheets, his eyes gently shut as if dreaming of something tender. She held his hand, the same hand that once rested on her shoulder during sleepless nights of study, the hand that had guided her through her very first law books. Now that hand was cold and lifeless. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, "You promised you'd be there when I became a lawyer." Gabriel Marquez, once one of the most respected judges in New England, was also the only man who had ever loved her unconditionally. After her mother walked away, he stayed. He taught her that justice was not only about statutes and rulings. It was about belief, compassion, and the strength to endure. Now Elena was only one exam away from earning her place in the legal world. She had pictured him in the front row, eyes filled with pride. But he was gone, leaving behind a void too vast to measure, and a promise she was now bound to keep. Not just to become a lawyer as he wished, but to carry justice with a heart a little warmer, a little gentler. What Elena did not yet know was that his death was not an ending. It was the beginning of a journey that would alter her life forever. A journey that began in silence but would one day echo with the most beautiful sound of all, the beating of a heart, learning to feel again. 2 weeks after the funeral, Elena still hadn't truly accepted that her grandfather was gone. Each morning, she unconsciously made 2 cups of coffee, one for herself and one for him. When steam curled up from the porcelain mug, her eyes stung. She turned toward the empty chair at the dining table, lips parting into a faint whisper, almost as if speaking to herself. "Grandfather, your coffee is ready, just like always. Why do I still expect you to walk out of your study? Why am I waiting for something that will never happen again?" The untouched cup sat there, cooling slowly, mirroring the hollow ache in her chest. The house, once warm with the sound of soft footsteps and his low laughter, now felt suffocatingly vast. Elena drifted from room to room, brushing her fingers over the bookshelf, over the small wooden gavel on his desk, whispering, "You were here. Everything is still here. Everything except you." The silence was not peace. It was pain, persistent, gnawing, reminding her that the only man who had always stayed had finally left. At night, lying in bed, she often caught herself asking, "Who will listen to me now? Who will remind me to be strong?" One late afternoon, the phone rang, shattering the heavy quiet. The call came from a law office. Elena assumed it was nothing more than routine paperwork, the cold formalities that death always left behind. What she didn't realize was that this call was the threshold to something entirely different, a chapter her grandfather had carefully set in motion long before she was ready. The notary's office smelled faintly of old paper and dark wood. Light spilled across the polished mahogany desk, where neat stacks of files rested like sealed secrets. Elena sat across from the notary, her hands clasped tightly in her lap until her knuckles turned white. Beside her sat a man whose very presence seemed to steal the air from the room. Dominic Hale. The last time she had seen him was years ago, at a dinner while her grandfather was still alive. Back then, he had simply been a tall, stern man, speaking in a deep voice about complicated lawsuits while she nervously poured coffee. Now, at 38, He was a legend in the world of European corporate law. He carried himself like someone accustomed to standing at the top. A perfectly tailored black suit, dark hair touched with silver at the temples, adding gravity to his striking presence. His sharply cut features and cold gray eyes, like the edge of a scalpel, made Elena feel as if he could slice through every defense she had ever built. Why him? Out of everyone, why does it have to be him? She thought, her pulse racing. The notary adjusted his glasses and began to read. All assets of Judge Gabriel Marquez, including the Beacon Hill residence, the bank accounts, and the scholarship fund designated for his granddaughter, shall be transferred only if. The room froze. Elena held her breath. If Miss Elena Marquez enters into a legal marriage with a man of impeccable reputation and respected social standing in Boston before her 24th birthday, if not, the entire estate shall be donated to the Young Lawyers Scholarship Foundation. The words dropped like heavy stones. Grandfather, why would you do this? Why would you bind me to a marriage I never chose? Her mouth opened, but her voice faltered. After a beat of silence, Dominic spoke. His voice was calm, steady, as though nothing about this surprised him. Judge Marquez discussed this clause with me before the will was finalized. He was concerned you would be left unprotected. Elena snapped her head toward him, finally meeting those gray eyes head-on. They were cold, precise, yet held something unsettling beneath the surface. Anger rose in her chest. You knew? You knew he wanted me to marry just to keep everything? Dominic did not flinch. I did. The notary cleared his throat and continued. Judge Marquez also expressed his full trust in Mr. Dominic Hale, his longtime friend, a man of integrity and reputation, as the most suitable candidate to marry his granddaughter. The air thickened. Elena shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is absurd. I won't marry someone I barely know. Dominic didn't move, but something flickered in his gaze, so faint, so subtle, that it unsettled her even more. His voice dropped, quiet but firm. You're right. This is difficult. But your grandfather was not a reckless man. If he made this decision, he must have had his reasons. Elena's throat tightened. What possible reason could justify forcing me into a marriage? Dominic rose, his tall frame casting a shadow over her, forcing her to tilt her chin upward. He stopped close, his presence overwhelming, his scent a subtle blend of leather and amber. Perhaps, he said softly, eyes locked on hers, because he knew we both needed something we've never dared to admit. Elena's heart pounded, torn between fury and an inexplicable pull that left her breathless. Elena stood frozen, her breath uneven, her hands trembling as they clenched tight. The words the notary had read echoed in her mind like a verdict already delivered, leaving no room for appeal. Dominic remained still, his composure unshaken, as if he were used to carrying the heaviest of decisions. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, calm, yet weighted with authority. Your grandfather didn't want you facing the future alone. He believed you needed someone to protect you. Elena turned toward him, her eyes rimmed red with restrained tears, fury sparking beneath. And that someone is you? A cold, distant lawyer who thinks a few lines in a will give him the right to step into my life? Dominic held her gaze, steady and unblinking. I wasn't the one who decided. Your grandfather made that choice. The notary continued in a measured tone, as if reciting another clause. Judge Gabriel Marquez also appointed Mr. Dominic Hale as temporary guardian of Miss Elena Marquez until the conditions of the will are fulfilled. Elena's chest tightened. It felt as if she had been placed inside a rigid frame where every step would now be watched. Strands of hair fell loosely across her face, but they couldn't hide the fire burning in her eyes as she stared at Dominic. "You knew all of this beforehand?" Her voice broke slightly, trembling with both anger and disbelief. Dominic gave a slow nod, his composure unshaken. "Yes, your grandfather trusted me. I did not refuse." The answer struck her like a blow. She stepped back, as though the distance might help her breathe again. Her fingers gripped the edge of the chair, her voice taut but resolute. "I don't need your protection. I've made it this far on my own, and I can keep standing." Dominic rose, adjusting the cuff of his suit, his tall frame casting a shadow across the narrow space between them. He didn't raise his voice, yet every word carried undeniable weight. "Perhaps, but your grandfather didn't believe that. He wanted to be certain that even in his absence you would not be alone." Elena swallowed hard, her eyes burning, caught between grief and helpless defiance. Before her, Dominic remained as calm as a court ready to deliver its judgment, and though she longed to resist, every word he spoke pressed her closer against a reality she could not escape. The air inside the notary's office was still heavy long after the will had been read. Elena sat back down, her shoulders trembling as she tried to steady herself. Dominic remained silent, his eyes fixed on some distant point, as if nothing about this was unexpected. When they stepped outside, Elena walked quickly, almost fleeing the suffocating atmosphere. Dominic followed at a measured pace, his composure a sharp contrast to the storm rising within her. "We need to talk," his voice rang out, calm but leaving no room for refusal. Elena stopped and turned on him. "I have nothing to say to you. My grandfather trusted you more than he trusted me, and now you expect me to listen to whatever else you have to impose?" Dominic's gaze didn't waver. He tilted his head slightly. "If you want to keep your grandfather's legacy, you'll have to face this condition. I won't force you, but we should speak openly, somewhere no one else can interfere." Her breath quickened, but after a long pause, she nodded. "Fine, but this will be the last time." The next day, she found herself at his office. The vast room stretched out, glass walls framing the Boston skyline, late afternoon light falling across a long mahogany desk. Dominic was already waiting, his tall figure commanding the sleek, cold space. "Elena," he said, his deep voice steady. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, lifting her chin, clinging to the sliver of control she felt slipping away. Dominic turned fully, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "To make things clear, this isn't a game, and your grandfather wasn't a reckless man. He knew exactly what he was doing. You expect me to believe he truly wanted me to marry a stranger just to keep an inheritance?" Elena's voice broke, her hands clenched tight. "It wasn't just about inheritance," Dominic replied, each word deliberate. "He believed that both you and I lacked something, a bond we've never dared to confront." Elena froze, caught speechless for a moment. Dominic pressed on, his voice low but precise. "My life has been engineered like a machine. Cases, victories, everything under control. But that control has been my prison. Your grandfather saw that, and he believed you were the key." Elena shook her head, swallowing the knot in her throat. "I don't need this, and I don't want it. If you think I'll willingly—" Dominic stepped closer, not hurried but resolute. "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm proposing an agreement, a marriage on paper. In return, you keep everything your grandfather left you." The room fell silent, the city sprawling behind them in muted light. Elena could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She held his gaze, then finally exhaled, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Fine, I'll do it, but only as an agreement. Nothing more." Something flickered in Dominic's eyes, unreadable, part relief, part restraint. He gave a single nod, his voice steady. "Then an agreement it will be, and we will honor it." 3 days later, they met again at Boston City Hall. There were no flowers, no music, no vows, just a small room lined with wooden benches where a clerk read the dry language of the law. Elena wore a simple cream dress, her hair tied neatly in a bun, her face bare of makeup. Yet she carried an understated grace and quiet strength. Dominic arrived in a navy suit, a silver tie sharpening the steel in his eyes. He looked as though he were entering a high-stakes board meeting, not a wedding. "Your name?" the clerk asked, voice even. "Elena Marquez." When she signed the papers, her hand trembled slightly, the letters tilting. At the bottom, the name appeared clear and final. Elena Marquez Hale. She stared at those words for a second, her chest sinking, as though she had just closed a door without knowing what lay on the other side. Dominic signed immediately after, his pen strokes swift and precise. No hesitation. The ceremony lasted exactly 15 minutes. As they stepped outside, the gray sky released a flurry of snowflakes. Elena pulled her coat tighter, the chill seeping through the fabric. Dominic glanced her way, his deep voice flat, almost like an announcement. "My car is waiting." She nodded softly. "Thank you." The black car glided through snow-dusted streets, so quiet that Elena could hear the pounding of her own heartbeat. Dominic sat beside her, gaze fixed straight ahead, his face unreadable. The distance between them felt endless, though only a single seat separated them. When the car stopped in front of the Beacon Hill estate, Elena lifted her eyes as though beholding a painting. The house stood tall with sharp modern lines, white stone walls, and vast glass panels reflecting the pale winter light. The garden out front was perfectly trimmed, but its perfection was cold, lifeless. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Efficient," Dominic corrected, as if precision mattered more than beauty. Inside, the space unfolded with high ceilings, gleaming marble floors, and stark white walls hung with abstract, expensive art. Everything was placed with flawless order. But Elena found no warmth, no family photos, no flowers, no sound beyond the echo of their footsteps. "I'll show you to your room," Dominic said, his tone calm, composed. She followed him up the marble staircase. The room he opened for her was vast. A king-sized bed, a private balcony overlooking the garden, a bathroom lined with black stone. Beautiful, luxurious, perfect, yet cold, like a hotel without a soul. "Thank you," Elena said softly, standing at the threshold. Dominic gave a short nod, his expression flickering with something unspoken before settling back into restraint. He only added, "My room is at the end of the hall. If you need anything, call. Dinner is at 8. Maria will prepare it." He turned and left, leaving Elena alone in the opulent emptiness. She sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes falling to the new ring on her hand. Simple, elegant, flawless, just like the man who had walked out. A long breath escaped her lips. She realized she had stepped into a marriage that did not begin with love, but with compromise. And this house, this man. Everything about it felt unfamiliar, almost chilling. The next morning, Elena woke earlier than usual. She hadn't slept well. Everything about the luxurious room felt too foreign, too cold, leaving her restless through the night. She went down to the kitchen. Maria, the housekeeper, had laid out ingredients for breakfast, but hadn't yet started the coffee machine. Elena smiled faintly and shook her head. "Let me do it. Back home, I always made coffee for my grandfather every morning. It's a habit I haven't been able to let go of." Maria nodded and stepped aside, watching as Elena carefully adjusted the sleek silver machine. When the aroma of Arabica medium roast filled the air, the cold kitchen seemed to soften, infused with a quiet warmth. Elena poured 2 cups, one for herself and one she placed on the table, an old habit she couldn't quite break. She stared at the rising steam, her chest tightening with memory. Footsteps echoed behind her. Dominic entered, dressed in a gray suit with a perfectly knotted tie, every inch prepared for an early meeting. He froze briefly when he saw her by the machine, hair tied back, wrapped in a loose cream sweater. For a moment, something in his stern expression eased. "Good morning," Elena said softly, sliding a cup toward him. Dominic's eyes lingered on her, then he accepted it. Their fingers brushed lightly, an instant so fleeting, yet enough to send a strange current down her spine. He took a sip. Silence hovered, then his voice dropped, quieter than usual, stripped of its usual rigidity. "Better than every morning before this." Elena blinked in surprise, a small laugh escaping her. "Was that a compliment?" Dominic didn't answer. He simply set the cup down, his composure intact, but his gaze carrying a softness she hadn't seen before. From across the room, Maria smiled faintly before turning away, careful not to intrude on the fragile moment. And in that brief pause, Elena realized, perhaps in this cold house, there was still space for a little warmth to slip in. On Monday morning, Elena woke with a heavy ache in her head. Her throat burned, her body ached, and heat radiated from her skin. She thought it was only exhaustion from sleepless nights, but by noon, her limbs trembled and her forehead burned with fever. She forced herself down to the kitchen, intent on making a cup of ginger tea. But as her hand reached for the cupboard, her vision blurred. "Elena!" Maria cried, rushing forward to catch her before she collapsed. Don't call Dominic. He has a trial this morning," Elena whispered, her voice fading in the fever's grip. Yet less than 10 minutes later, the front door clicked open. Dominic appeared in the doorway, his coat still on, his gray eyes sharp with panic as they fell on Elena curled up in bed. Her face flushed crimson with fever. He strode to her side, pressing a cool hand firmly to her forehead. In that instant, all the usual restraint in his expression vanished, replaced by unguarded worry. "How long have you had this fever?" His voice was low, urgent. "Since morning. It's nothing. I just need rest." Elena tried to smile, though her eyelids were heavy. "No," Dominic cut her off, his tone decisive. "I'm not leaving you alone." For the rest of the day, he stayed by her side. He changed the cold cloth on her forehead, brewed ginger tea, checked her temperature without fail. From time to time, Elena, half dreaming, felt his hand linger gently against her cheek, surprisingly tender for a man known for his composure. As night fell, Dominic remained at the bedside, his chair drawn close. When Elena drifted into fevered sleep, she caught the faintest murmur, so soft it seemed meant only for himself. "Don't ever scare me like this again, Elena." A week later, Elena accompanied Dominic to the Fairmont Hotel for the annual law conference. Dominic was one of the keynote speakers, while she was invited as a guest observer. In the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead as laughter and conversation filled the air. Dominic, in a black suit and deep blue tie, mingled effortlessly with international colleagues, every movement radiating authority. Elena lingered quietly near the bar, feeling like an outsider in this glittering, unfamiliar world. "You must be Elena?" a warm voice said. She looked up to see a young man with light brown hair and a kind smile. "I'm Liam Parker, criminal lawyer. I heard your presentation on family law once. Very impressive." A faint blush touched her cheeks. "Thank you. I didn't expect anyone to remember that." Liam extended a hand. "Would you like to dance?" "Just a slow ballad." Elena hesitated, her eyes instinctively flicking toward Dominic. He was still in conversation, yet his gray gaze was fixed on her, sharp and unyielding. It froze her for a heartbeat. "Yes," she finally said, placing her hand in Liam's. Music swelled, soft and steady. Liam spoke easily, his tone gentle, his presence kind. Elena smiled, perhaps the first genuine smile since stepping into that cold, perfect house. Yet each time she glanced back, Dominic's eyes cut through the crowd, holding her fast. Not angry, not loud, but laced with something unmistakably possessive. When the music ended, Liam began to speak, but a deep voice interrupted from just behind. "Thank you for keeping my wife entertained." Elena startled. Dominic stood there, his face calm but his gaze locked firmly on her. Liam stepped back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Now you do," Dominic said curtly, then turned to Elena. "We're leaving." The ride home was wrapped in silence, broken only by the hum of the engine. Elena turned toward the window, watching snow fall in thick white veils. Gathering her courage, she whispered, "Were you jealous?" Dominic's eyes stayed on the road, his voice low, rougher than usual. "I'm not used to seeing you smile like that with someone else." Elena said nothing more. The words were few, but they lit something inside her. An ember smoldering quietly, dangerous yet undeniably warm. That night, rain poured relentlessly. Wind howled against the glass panes, the steady drumming of water pressing the house into a heavy silence. Elena sat curled on the sofa, a thin blanket draped across her legs. On the television, news about law and court cases flickered soundlessly, but her mind drifted elsewhere. Dominic's words in the car replayed, "I'm not used to seeing you smile like that with someone else." Footsteps approached. Dominic entered, his coat damp with rain, his dark hair slightly disheveled. He set a steaming cup of tea before her, then sat across the room. For a long while, neither spoke. Only the storm outside filled the space. At last, Elena broke the silence, her voice soft yet firm. "What are we doing, Dominic?" He looked up, and for the first time his gray eyes didn't hide. They revealed weariness, a fracture in his composed armor. "Do you want the honest answer?" She nodded. "I'm not good with feelings," he said slowly. "Never have been. For me, love means losing control, and losing control means failure." Elena said nothing, though her gaze softened. Dominic's hands clenched over his knee, as though admitting something he had never spoken aloud. "But since you've been here, everything has changed. I think of you even in the courtroom. I remember the smell of coffee in the mornings. I want to come home, just to see you." Silence lingered, heavy yet fragile. Elena moved closer, taking a seat beside him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Dominic, love isn't losing control. It's finally living. You're stronger when you allow yourself to feel, not when you keep running from it." Dominic bowed his head, resting his forehead gently against her shoulder. In that moment, he let go of the weight he always carried alone, allowing himself, just once, to be vulnerable. In the days that followed, life between them settled into a fragile peace. Elena grew used to Dominic's clumsy gestures of care. A bowl of soup, a brief question after a long day, the quiet way he waited for her to come home late at night. She no longer kept her guard up, beginning to believe that this connection, slow and tentative, was steadily growing. But Dominic did not feel the same. Every warm moment pierced deeper into the armor he had worn for too long. That morning, Dominic faced an important trial. He was supposed to be fully focused, yet as he stood in the courtroom, what flashed through his mind wasn't a sharp argument, but Elena's gentle smile as she spoke of her night shift. Just a second, and he realized he was losing control. The very thing he had always considered the greatest failure. After the trial, he drove aimlessly through the city, streets blurred behind the windshield, but one question echoed in his mind. Where is this going with her? By the time he returned, the kitchen was bathed in golden dusk. Elena was still in her blazer, hair tied hastily, scribbling notes in her book. She looked up, eyes bright with quiet excitement. "You're back. Did the case go well? I just finished my presentation. My professor said—" "Elena." Dominic cut her off, his voice hoarse. She blinked. "What is it?" He paused, avoiding her eyes. "I think we need some distance, just for now." The kitchen fell into silence. Elena's smile faded, replaced by a deep, quiet sorrow. "Why?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. Dominic clenched his fists, the words dropping like stones. "Because I'm starting to care too much. I'm depending on you, and I don't know how to handle that." Elena studied him for a long moment. No tears, no anger. Only understanding laced with disappointment. She rose slowly and said, "You don't have to understand everything, Dominic. But if you retreat every time something becomes real, you'll lose the most precious things in life." Then she quietly gathered her things. As the door closed behind her, Dominic stood frozen in the empty kitchen, feeling the fragile warmth he had just begun to touch vanish as though it had never been there at all. 2 weeks after Elena left the Beacon Hill estate, Dominic still hadn't reached out. He tormented himself daily, yet pride and fear kept him paralyzed. Still, each morning he brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one left untouched beside him, cooling slowly into silence. That evening, Elena returned to the courthouse where she was interning to retrieve a set of personal files she had left in the law library. Rain lashed against the windows, the corridors nearly empty. As she stepped outside into the storm, a shadow blocked her path. The man's hood was pulled low, his voice rough. "You're Elena Marquez?" Elena froze, instinct tightening her chest. "Who are you?" Steel flashed. A knife. Before she could retreat, the blade drove into her abdomen. Pain seared through her body, her breath caught in her throat. Through the haze, she heard him mutter, "Consider this a message. Tell Hale to stop digging, or this gets worse." Then he vanished into the rain. Elena collapsed onto the slick pavement, blood spreading, merging with the downpour. She tried to move, but her strength faltered. In the blur of pain, one thought echoed, "I never got to tell him." At that very moment, Dominic exited the courthouse after a grueling trial. His shirt was damp with rain, his shoulders heavy. As he crossed toward the parking lot, a scream pierced the storm. "Someone's been stabbed! Call an ambulance!" He spun, and in the dim streetlight he saw a figure crumpled on the ground. The pale coat soaked red, the familiar silhouette. "Elena!" His roar broke the night as he sprinted, dropping to his knees, pressing both hands desperately against the wound. "Stay with me! Don't close your eyes! Look at me!" Her gaze fluttered weakly toward him. "Dominic, I just came back for some files. I didn't think—" "Don't talk! Don't you dare leave me!" His voice cracked, trembling. "Elena, I've never begged anyone in my life. But I'm begging you now. Please, don't go." A faint smile touched her lips, rain mingling with a tear. "I don't want to leave you." Sirens wailed through the storm. Dominic never released her hand, gripping tightly as the stretcher rushed her into the ambulance. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Dominic sat outside the operating room, his shirt stained with blood, his hands trembling from the strain of holding on to nothing. He was no longer the composed attorney, but a desperate man, whispering over and over in silence, "If she lives, I'll never let her go again." When the surgeon finally emerged to announce the operation was successful, Dominic bowed his head, trembling as though he had dragged something precious back from the abyss. 3 days after the surgery, Elena stirred awake in the stark white hospital room. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the air, morning light spilling through the thin curtain. Beside her bed, Dominic slumped in a chair, his shirt wrinkled, stubble shadowing his jaw. The moment he sensed her movement, his gray eyes shot open. "Elena." His voice was hoarse, trembling with relief. Her lips parted, weak but steady. "You stayed?" "I never left. Not for a single moment." He reached out, clasping her small hand still tethered by IV lines. Elena closed her eyes briefly, a faint smile on her lips. "Don't look at me. As if I'm about to leave you." Dominic lowered his head, a strangled laugh escaping him. Strange, but real. "I'm sorry. I've never been so terrified." For a long pause, he held her hand tighter, his gaze finally unguarded. "I love you, Elena. I don't have the right words, and I can't promise the future. But that night, when I thought I'd lost you, nothing else mattered. Only you." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. She said nothing, only looked at him, her gaze carrying all the answer he needed. And in that sunlit room, with their hands entwined, silence no longer meant distance. It was certainty. A month after her discharge, Elena returned to Beacon Hill. This time, as she crossed the threshold, the house no longer felt cold. The once sterile walls now bore quiet touches, a lavender pot blooming on the balcony, novels scattered on the shelves, and most of all, the steady presence of Dominic in every corner. Life together began to take on a different rhythm. Dominic no longer buried himself in work until midnight. He came home earlier, and dinner became a moment they shared, not filled with chatter, but enough to feel companionship. In the mornings, Elena no longer drank her coffee alone. Dominic always placed 2 cups on the table, a quiet gesture carrying deep meaning. One rainy afternoon, while tidying the study her grandfather had left behind, Elena discovered an old folder. Inside lay the marriage contract, the very document that had once bound her to a future she thought was forced upon her. Holding it in her hands, her chest tightened. The harsh legal lines reminded her that their beginning had not been freedom, but condition. She carried it down to the living room and laid it on the wooden table. "Dominic, do you think we still need this?" His gray eyes flickered to the paper, unshaken. Without a word, he rose, opened the fireplace, and lit a flame. The document curled, darkened, and turned to ash. "From now on, everything is real," he said, his voice low and certain. Elena stood still, tears brimming. "Are you sure? Not because of the inheritance, not because of my grandfather?" Dominic stepped closer, his hands firm on her shoulders. In the glow of the fire, his face was both resolute and tender. "I've never been more sure of anything. I love you, Elena. Not out of duty, not for anyone else. Just for you." She broke into tears, wrapping her arms around him. Through trembling breath, she whispered, "Then, I choose you too. Freely." In that moment, both understood. Their marriage had surpassed contracts and legacies. It was no longer obligation. It had become a choice made willingly, wholly, and without regret. In the house that had once been cold, the fireplace blazed with warmth. And within its glow, two souls once burdened with fear and solitude had finally found a place to rest. In each other's arms, they began a new journey. This time, truly their own.